Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the next episode of Stream Time Sports. My name is Chris Stone. I'm the community lead, joined as always by our CEO, Nick Meacham. Now, Nick, we've not had the chance between different holidays to speak since the World Cup ended. And today we were going to talk about some of the early viewing figures that we did have available to us from some of the national broadcasters, as well as some of the astounding amount of zeros in some of the social media and digital numbers. But in typical sports fashion, Nick, despite doing our best effort to, be as prepared as possible, there's more breaking news. And last week we had the information that was, depending on who you ask, either leaked out to the media too soon before it could be properly discussed. But there was the FIFA Forward Enterprise program that I think lasted, Nick, all about 24, maybe 48 hours at best. So before we talk about some of the broadcast numbers and consumption numbers that we have available to us, Nick, we're going to start with the more breaking news, the juicier piece of news, at least certainly maybe the more controversial piece of news around the FIFA Forward Enterprise. And I think for anyone that's not aware of it, Nick, my understanding of it was FIFA was essentially going to set up a separate organization within the business that would be responsible for the commercial entities within, scheduling, broadcasting, sponsorship, that would operate separate from the non-profit version of FIFA. And I believe that equity stake was going to be a minority stake. They said that the private investors would not have any say, but we've talked about private equity enough, Nick, that even if they don't have say, they can certainly apply pressure. And I believe the initial advance payment was going to be $20 billion to FIFA, which they would then split across their member associations, I believe is what they call them. And that there'd be more money down the road, upwards of $40 billion, Nick, over the course, I think, to about 2037. Now, there's some political things tied in with that, with associations to family members within Donald Trump's family who'd be a part of it. There's certainly a lack of clarity as to how that private organization be run with money, and all these sorts of things. But ultimately, Nick, it lasted about 48 hours before, being led by UEFA and others. It was pretty much shot down. But Nick, interestingly, I'm one of those people, Nick. We won't get into politics. I know there's a few people in our circle that like to talk about politics quite a bit. I'm one of those like billionaires shouldn't exist people, Nick. But my initial thought, Nick, was screw FIFA. But then my second thought was, are they actually doing anything different than anybody else? When you start thinking about like La Liga and CVC, the NFL is now like private equity. I know there's a lot of nuance in all this, Nick, but my initial thought was not positive. And then when I put my business sports pro hat on, I was like, I don't like how they were proposing to do it. I had a lot of questions about it, but I don't know if what they were trying to do is necessarily wrong when you think about other things we've seen in the industry, Nick.
I think you've set it up pretty well. Look, I took a very bad week to take a holiday. I was on leave and I checked my phone. I tried to keep my phone away and intentionally stay away from it. And then I didn't have any of my work apps like live and kicking, but I did have like the SVT, the Swedish app, and it's come up on their news about this thing. And I'm like, okay. And then I went down the rabbit hole of looking online and going, no, this can't be happening again. But it's having a serious sense of deja vu from the European Super League stuff. It was basically almost rinse and repeat a situation of what happened before. But a couple of things quickly. I think the story broke from some reporting by Martin Ziegler. So he's very well connected, as good a journalist as there is in sports, and has broken a lot of these major stories. And I think he was one of the first to break this. Obviously, he got some tip-offs of what was going on. Some of the numbers you shared, I think, were slightly off the mark from what I understood. So I think the valuation was based at 20 billion.
That's what it was, yeah.
But they were looking to raise about 4 billion initially, which was basically going to be a cash injection to all the requisite member federations or member associations, which is like 211 of them. So basically a nice big fat check to give away 20% of the future commercials of this new commercial entity. And I think they would need to put more in to then actually run and operate this initiative. But to your point, yeah, we've been here before. We've seen other examples of it. It's not, the actual concept is pretty alike. Several examples we could probably point to. You think about La Liga, but you think about volleyball would be one of the obvious ones that stands out. Volleyball World, we've covered on this podcast a number of times and through other channels where that was separated out from the federation, and they could the commercial side completely separate and run that there. And there's other examples that do exist at the international federation level, and indeed other examples that exist at a national governing body level. So yeah, actually the approach is not atypical of what we have seen. But the caveat to all of this is just because you can get money doesn't mean you should. And in this instance, another example of FIFA's like, I think it's something like $5 billion is sitting in the bank right now. They don't need cash injection to like invest into development. They have 5 billion sitting there that's just collecting interest that they could definitely start distributing themselves first before starting to give away a part of this massive enterprise that is already a cash machine, basically. And I think the revenue is up nearly double from the last cycle. So it's on a huge trajectory. What's this money going to actually do? And we can go into the whys here, but it is astounding of all organizations to look to consider this type of thing in sports on paper. But you are right completely. It has been done before. And I think from everything we've seen up until this point, it's no surprising that FIFA's in the thick of this, and particularly Infantino with everything we've seen around hydration breaks, who he's been standing next to at all the requisite World Cup matches, etc., etc.
Well, in terms of the valuation, Nick, and you are right the way you phrased that. Do you feel like that 20 billion is accurate? Do you feel like that would be getting FIFA its money back? Because I think one of the things we've talked about, Nick, is quite often some of these valuations that come in, like they can be really difficult for those organizations to match those valuations, or whether or not FIFA was going to struggle to get that much money anyways. I guess that's maybe part of the question. To your point, is why would they actually need all of this? I mean, there's the obvious answers of it. It's right in your pocket right away, but it just comes across a certain way.
Yeah, if you play that caveat of in good faith, there's good faith and
Yeah.
intent here, which is we'll go down the other line in a second. But if it's good faith that they seriously, and Infantino from all the reports are that no one around him appears to have known that this was happening. His offsiders or insiders or advisors, whatever you want to call them, are basically been super fast to distance themselves from this situation. I'm trying to think of where they could go. He's been adamant, the statements that have come out, that this is to drive the development of football right across the globe. Again, I point to the same things. There's already billions being distributed. Does this really move the needle in the future? And the question is, I mean, the answer could well be, yeah, it could definitely move it. But what we never see coming out of FIFA, we never see really coming from international federations these days, is any talk about the development of sport. This is the first time you'll hear about it. Otherwise, all you hear is it's reached billions of fans. We generated billions of dollars of revenue. That's all you'll hear. You won't, we now have all this participation growing in these countries. That's what I'd love to hear from some of these presidents of different federations, of how they are developing, making kids more active. That's the job of a federation president, not just to drive revenue. And that's where obviously we've seen symptom after symptom of this mindset of revenue is all that it's really needing to drive the growth of sport. But we've seen countless examples of just having more money for the sake of having it doesn't lead to immediate results or long-term results unless they have an incredibly robust plan in place. And again, we've seen for countless of times that people like FIFA, and I probably could point to a few other federations, have lacked a lot of substance behind how that money's being invested and used country by country. On the bad faith side, I mean, quite frankly, everyone's got to wonder, like, what's going on here? Why would anyone want to be selling off part of FIFA for an immediate cash check when you have billions and billions in the bank just sitting there? Questions have to be asked as to who's going to benefit from this, not just the member associations, but who else? Because there's no logical reason why you would do this. And at the valuation you talked about, I think 20 billion valuation on the FIFA World Cup as an enterprise is cheap given some of the stuff we've seen. Like what's the Dallas Cowboys worth these days? What have we seen for an NBA team? Like $10 billion for an NBA and NFL team of late. You're saying that the FIFA World Cup's worth 2 Seattle Seahawks?
Yeah.
Please, come on.
Yeah. No, absolutely not. And I guess maybe the question comes back to, Nick, and we've talked about the European Super League in a similar way. Do you think this ultimately kills this potential option for FIFA in the future, or simply they're just gonna something like this might come about in the future? Because I think, again, we talked about this. I don't know if it's necessarily the what they were trying to pull as much as the how, but you also think of things like they did invest a lot of money in FIFA Plus. Like we know that there is an appetite from FIFA to increase the value of their media rights in different ways. So I guess it's just, is this the end of this particular option, or is it might just maybe for Infantino to do this, but someone else ultimately comes looking to do this? Because like I said, I don't think it's inherently a terrible thing. It's just the optics of it were not very well presented in this case.
Well, it's definitely trying to hit. I'm trying to think of the right analogy here. Like strike while the iron's hot. Just come off the World Cup, record revenues. Many will suggest that the next World Cup will have difficulties getting close to those sort of revenue numbers because there's always been a commercial bubble that exists around anything based in the US. Obviously, the event scaled as well. So, in terms of maximum value as FIFA is perceived right now, this could be potentially it. Potentially, the next cycle you've got it in Morocco, Spain, Portugal, technically Uruguay, and
Argentina.
Argentina, maybe I can't remember. They're basically it's a multinational event again. I think that there's an element of trying to strike while the iron's hot, but again, out of any organization in sports, I just can't see where the value of this is. Now, if the message was we want to separate FIFA out and decentralize its power and control on the commercial sitting within the federation and run it completely separately and run it as a commercial business, and then let the federation focus much more on governing the game and so forth, then that would have more argument and more value to the messaging merit than it would what this looks like, which is effectively just selling a cut of an already extremely successful commercial enterprise that many would argue is on such a trajectory revenue-wise. This investment's not going to, drive that up even further. It is simply an upfront check for the now. So, say what you want around Infantino and what we've seen from FIFA and what we've talked about over the last couple of years. This makes no sense to many of us other than a cash grab, and really is one of the things that really hurts sports, frankly, in this day and age where we're seeing more of this investment come in, and fans don't want to see it. Fans don't want to see billions of dollars being distributed through to other investors and private equity firms and other billionaires. They want to see that money, well, either not being spent by them or being filtered into ways that have a positive impact on them somehow, some way. And this isn't it.
Yeah. Well, speaking of the fans' sake, slightly off piece, I'm curious to get your opinion on it because we have not spoken about it. The halftime show and the pregame entertainment, like, I don't think I saw a single person either ask for it to begin with. I certainly didn't see anybody during the show talk about enjoying it. Like, if that's what the trade-off would have to be for that $20 billion, because assuming that's what it is, right? They want to make it an entertainment. They want to rise the ticket prices, things like that, Nick. Like, oh God, that was rough, Nick. That was I watch halftime Super Bowl show every year, but like this wasn't it.
I think they're just trying too hard with some of those things, really. Like they wanted to create its own identity, different to what the Super Bowl is and try and be the next Super Bowl and have that credibility and prestige. Yeah, just missed the mark again. Didn't read the room. Feels like they are at times just completely disconnected from the rest of the real world with some of the stuff we continue to see and hear coming out of there. And I've spoken to people at FIFA over the years or have been at FIFA, and it's a pretty much a bit of a nightmare situation to be involved with. So I'm not surprised this type of stuff pops up. I don't know. I think everyone was expecting the worst, and it was probably, I think, matched my expectations of what I was going to expect. So I don't know how I actually would love to think of like what could be the way that could be done and that would really work. And I actually think there's ingredients there that were smart. They had an array of major global stars rather than just the one big show. I thought that was quite a cool concept. They just tried way too hard and pulled too many gimmicks out of the hat, and it just fell flat.
Yeah. Well, Nick, we've already started to receive some numbers. We will get more official numbers from Nielsen over the course of maybe even by the end of this week, by the time this podcast comes out. But we will hear things about the success of the tournament in terms of some of its viewership numbers. So we're going to go and kind of break some things down. We'll start with the traditional broadcast, work things into sort of the broadcast versus streaming because there's some interesting numbers there. And then we'll go into the social media numbers where there are some truly eye-watering large numbers, Nick. But just in terms of talking about the traditional broadcast and kind of focusing on a few markets here, In America, Fox Sports reported to have 7.7 million average viewers per match, which was a 116% increase from 2022. One that I thought was interesting, Nick, was Telemundo, being operated by Peacock, which is the Spanish operator in the U.S., saw a 143% increase from this tournament to the last one. And there's actually some really shocking numbers, Nick, about how Telemundo and Peacock was performing across it. I think the Mexico England game was the largest game that ever been on that channel as well. But if we look further across not just the average match, but the finals, there was 62.8 million people in the U.S. across all of Fox Sports' audiences. That includes Fox Sports as well as Fox Telemundo, which would make it the largest soccer game in the history of the USA. So quite a massive event in that scale. In the UK, in the semifinal, which was the England heartbreaking loss against Argentina, that had 21 million viewers, which was on par with the England-Spain final of the Euros in 2024. Interestingly, that had an 85% audience share. So seemingly, if you were watching TV in the UK, you were watching
Wow.
that game. And then in Spain, there was a record-breaking viewer of 15.7 million average viewers and held an 87% audience share. So, Nick, record-breaking numbers across multiple different nations, the U.S. being the main one there. But Nick, I think with some of these broadcast numbers, I think maybe the question for me is, how impressive maybe are they necessarily, or is this just the World Cup's the World Cup and it's always going to perform? I mean, with some of those traditional broadcast numbers, have you seen anything else that's come out and perhaps surprised you?
No, I think seeing those numbers, I do think there's a little element that has surprised me that is that they have performed so well because of the length of the tournament. I did expect the numbers perhaps at the final stage to do quite well, frankly, and we have seen that whilst everyone has a new record that they share with consumption these days, because consumption in general terms is going up in all facets. So it's difficult to delineate whether that means it's actually relative to current consumption trends, whether it is actually as big a record as it makes out. But no, major surprises in terms of just the level of some of the performance numbers. I think it was just interesting to see the scale of how big the Spanish audience and how big that number is. It's not a surprise to me that Telemundo is such a big player, because we've seen countless numbers of that sort of stuff as well. But at that scale, it just shows, wow, what an impact that has to the overall audience mix in the US. So it's tough to delineate, and really, like, you've got the views, you've got ratings, you've got all these other numbers to put together, and it is the best thing you can try and do is compare apples with apples where you can. I think that the crux of it is in the US, it did really well. It probably expected to do really well. I'm very intrigued to see what the FIFA's numbers look like soon when they release their. We've reached 7 billion people this time around, versus what they did for the World Cup last time, which we did a podcast on, and also for the Club World Cup. But I think one thing I would take away is that streaming is clearly now completely etched into the ecosystem. There is no discount on audience that you would expect from like free to wear, OTA and OTT based services. It's completely sort of discriminated or delineated. That's not the right word. Completely, basically, it's all meshed together now. So basically, it doesn't really matter what platform it's getting distributed. It's going to get the audience that it's needing. So I think it's just another sort of sign of validation of all of that.
Nick, I've been watching this guy on TikTok going totally off piece, but it goes the way he talks about homogenized. So that's, I think, what you're talking about, Nick. When you take all those numbers, you've homogenized everything.
I was going to say homeostasis, and that's not the word. Yeah. Homogenized. That's it.
Yeah, there we go. Adding new things. But to your point, Nick, on the digital side of things, there's a completely different set of numbers, I think, that tells maybe perhaps a more interesting story in terms of the how. Fox reported on their digital platforms that they had 17.2 billion views, making it the largest digital event in their history. So that includes some of the streaming platforms or social media platforms. The BBC came out and said that they had 237 million streams of this World Cup, which doubled the number in 2022. ITV said they had 468 million streams from 21 million users, making 16 out of 20 of ITV's biggest shows this year have been the World Cup. In terms of connected TV, really interesting statistic from YouTube, Nick. I'd be curious to know, because we talked about broadcast deals, but they said that they reported 550 million viewers on connected TV, which I think is interesting as we think of YouTube being a mobile first platform, some of those connected TV numbers. And then just on the streaming side, there was a record broken for concurrent viewers from our friends at Casa TV during the Brazil versus Japan game, which had 21 million concurrent viewers on Casa TV. So some of the interesting numbers there, Nick, is the growing prevalence, as you said, of streaming numbers versus just the traditional linear broadcast.
Everyone's got really good at shaping a different story now around these numbers. That all sounds great. I am intrigued to hear, not just the records, but also what were the expectations? Were the numbers actually aligned with what they were expecting? Now, those numbers weren't often shared publicly in most of those instances, but YouTube are looking at using this whole story and experience as a gateway, as an engine to drive more and more live rights onto their platform. And I'm still catching up, but obviously saw the deal announced with YouTube and Peacock, where Peacock now is going to be available through YouTube Premium. Again, leaning into more and more of these live sports being available through the YouTube's premium proposition. So I think this is just going to be another example of where, for the next few years, for the next set of major events, YouTube will be using this as a catalyst, these numbers, to really try and push both for the rights owners, but also other creators, other broadcasters to start broadcasting more live sports on the channels, because they're able to get the audience numbers, bring a serious critical mass to the platform. Because YouTube also help visibility. When they get a premium set of rights, you work with YouTube, you talk to YouTube, they will help amplify that even further. And no question they've done so here.
And with those numbers, Nick, how much of this is streaming is growing the number of viewers versus it's simply diversifying the way people consume things? And if it is that latter, what does that mean in terms of a couple different things? The media rights values, if we're seeing streaming versus linear broadcast, or even from a measurement perspective, because as you said, we're, I think, probably more than ever struggling to just have one metric to talk about everything. Because even those statistics I talked about with Fox, they'll tell you that's the combined numbers. So what is that combined number of linear broadcast versus streaming views? Just, what does that all mean in terms of overall viewership? Whether, like I said, whether that's a positive or just simply a diversification, and then what it means on the back end when you're talking to, um, you know, rights holder, or sorry, broadcasters, platforms, sponsors, all those sorts of things.
I think everyone's a little bit unsure of what to take from it all. I think you have to be both in the streaming landscape and over the air, like just point blank. Where I live here in Sweden, I don't have access to actual over the air TV. I've only got it through streaming, so I have access to all the requisite platforms, but probably a user error, but I couldn't get my connection working to get the local channels served to me. So I'm only using the streaming product. So, for example, the World Cup I would not watch probably, or would have struggled to watch it without that connectivity. Yeah. So I just think you have to be taking a multi-distribution approach. That's why Sky did the deal with ITV to have multiple channels and touch points to also get their content in different places that serve different audiences. And I think you just got to be everywhere now in some way, shape, or form. So whoever's buying rights has to take a multi-distribution approach. Otherwise, they're risking leaving opportunity on the table, frankly.
For sure. And then, Nick, the last sort of area I want to go into, and just again curious to dive into this, is some of the numbers on social media, Nick, and they are absolutely bonkers. So I'm hoping you'll just stick with me as I read off some of these numbers, because they are pretty incredible. So we had both TikTok and YouTube as preferred platforms. We discussed beforehand sort of what we thought those would be, and I think there's still, even amongst these numbers, things to figure out. But according to numbers that TikTok went and distributed for everybody, the official FIFA World Cup account generated 28 billion views and 1.7 billion likes. Their account gained 55 million followers during 2026. The World Cup Hub, which we talked about, they were creating that sort of bespoke place for people to come, reportedly had 520 million visits, with 96 million fans participating in the Panini card collecting experience. And overall, using sort of the hashtag or just World Cup content in general, they said had 1.2 trillion with a T views on TikTok. Some absolutely just crazy numbers. And then when we look at YouTube, do you want to talk about TikTok before we go to YouTube, or should we throw all the numbers out there, Nick?
I mean, we let's go to TikTok. I'd say one of the numbers that actually stood out to me. I mean, the trillion numbers, ridiculous. Like I don't even know what they mean. It's just too many zeros to me. I couldn't write it out. I'd probably get it wrong if someone asked me to write out how many zeros it is, but it is a lot. Did you get a chance to use any of those the preferred platform channel or the hub?
So I mentioned I tried the YouTube one just to see if I could watch the 10 minutes and if it would send me over. And if you listen to that previous podcast, you didn't, I'll really quickly say it. I found it really difficult, even though my parents
That's
at
right.
home are YouTube TV subscribers. Instead of just syncing me up to YouTube TV at 10 minutes, it tried to take me to the Fox One platform, which I understand, but also just found it a little bit sort of herky jerky when you could have just pulled me over to YouTube TV, which is obviously owned by you guys. I did not check out the FIFA Hub. I did not try to do any of the first 10 minutes on TikTok. Um, Now, obviously, I saw a ton of content on there, but again, it wasn't always on FIFA's own channels. It would have been on whatever billions of views came from non-official TikTok channels.
Well, the number that they've also shared is that they generate 465 million views for official broadcasters on a live stream. So that starts to
Yeah.
give you a picture of what that funnel sort of looks like. Of we talked about basically some sort of variation of affiliate marketing, basically of getting people to consume the live match
Right.
and filter that to official broadcasters. Now, again, no idea what the target was for that, but it's not an insignificant number. 465 million views. I would love to see the detail of who basically maximize that opportunity. But there's no question that that is a significant number that broadcasters could have tapped into. Whether that has turned into subscribers, whether that means that people have stayed on platform, we don't have those details. But it's definitely something you'll probably hear a lot more from TikTok's perspective, anyway, for the time for the near future as they try and really push this idea of live streaming as an entry point into the official broadcast.
And who does this, I suppose, benefit the most? I'm just thinking in terms of because, like, what it's almost hard to comprehend, Nick, what 1.2 trillion views on TikTok accounts for in value. Whether that, as you say, that's the story you can go to tell broadcasters because TikTok has provided the 465 million views directly from broadcast channels. Like, what does that even provide for them? I got to go to an event with Meta the other week in New York City where we were talking about social media followers and things like that, and whether or not they actually see ROI on that or it's just good marketing. Like, I don't even know where to begin. Is that something that is better suited for advertisers and sponsors, not necessarily the rights holders? Like, it's such an incredibly large number, Nick. It's hard to even really comprehend how I would even begin to use that if I were in a negotiation, if I was FIFA or if I was TikTok. Like, just a really, it's such a bizarre, not bizarre, just incredibly large number.
It is. I would say the main way they're going to get value from it at that scale is very much the sponsorship outlook. And not really advertising because TikTok's not a platform like that per se. Although I'm sure you can buy advertising space, through through TikTok's channels. But for the rights owner themselves to maximize value, they will be looking to do sponsored content related sales, whether it be through official year-round sponsorship products through to more one-off deals. You're seeing a lot more brands now do like collab posts where they'll get on Instagram. I'm not sure about on TikTok, where they get added to and atted if they are connected with a social media post. So doing the highlights, and it'll be linked with a with a brand who wants to get access to that audience and visibility by sheer association, and they're able to add that in, which is a huge needle mover for those brands who just basically can effectively do a views by doing a deal with the requisite rights owner. So it does open up opportunities to drive more revenue through different types of digital sponsorship, sponsored content, ad sales, by having that sheer scale there. But also, if they can filter out that mix and be able to drive people to their official platforms, it also does serve more of a direct purpose for the broadcasters who have been a little unsure of what service this will provide for them, other than giving TikTok more live sports and moving people away from their respective own digital platforms. So I think it's hard to quantify whether that trillion converting into half a billion streams for official channels is good or not. It sounds good, but again, there's too many zeros for me to really accurately look at and quantify whether that is the case or not. But there's no question that reach is a win for those who lend into TikTok and maximize that reach and visibility. Because the hard part is really in this day and age, selling that stuff. You've got to have a really good sales team in place with the right sort of tools and assets there, and otherwise you could have missed that opportunity quite easily. And I think there's some examples of stuff I've seen on YouTube where that has been the case for some.
Well, what I think would be interesting, Nick, is maybe with the conversion part, and what you probably will never get information for is how many of those 1.2 trillion views came from people that actually watched the World Cup. Like, I'd be curious to know, like, did anybody
Yeah.
watch World Cup content that didn't? Because I saw an interesting question phrased, and I forget the exact wording. I won't get it verbatim, but it was like, what is a more valuable fan? Someone that watched a complete 90-minute game but never watched any social, or someone that watched 90 minutes worth of social content but never actually watched a game? Like, which one of those is actually a more engaged fan, or a more profitable fan for you? And I was just sort of sat there thinking, like, if someone only watched the World Cup final, but they're never going to watch anything else, like, is that actually as valuable as someone that's engaged and spent all that time scrolling through social media, but maybe didn't watch the game? I thought it was an interesting way to phrase the question. I'm not sure I know the answer.
Well, I did at my presentation at the investment event. I used
Yeah.
a study that I think Two Circles have presented previously, which has got how the non-highlights, so the non-live rights versus the live stuff, and how much it skews to the non-live side. Yet all the economics sit on the live side still first and foremost. So that margin is changing a bit. Um, for me, there should be no difference realistically, but the reality is the economic model does not serve both in an equal sense. Now, there is obviously an emotional connection that brands are looking for, that live sports generates, that non-live sports doesn't to the same capacity. And there's an argument, therefore, that content, that view is worth more because of that. But that is, again, not backed up with any science or data behind it, just a gut feel.
Yeah, for sure. Well, if we look at YouTube, some of the numbers that came from their side, Nick, is again similar deal with TikTok with FIFA, essentially in terms of some of the content that was there, a lot of archived footage, some behind the scenes stuff. But they said that they've created, and this is where I'd be curious to know what the definition of this is. But in their press release, Nick, more than 200 billion lifetime views of World Cup related content. I've heard of views. I don't quite know what lifetime views is, but 200 billion sounds like a really good number as to what lifetime views. They had 1.7 billion unique viewers watch World Cup related content during the tournament. So that's roughly maybe just under a quarter of the population. Where are we at, Nick? We're around 8 billion people these days and climbing. Um, and then I also mentioned the 550 million viewers who consumed World Cup content on their TVs via YouTube, which again I think is an interesting trend in terms of we talked about before. YouTube should no longer probably be considered a mobile first platform. It is definitely, in terms of a consumer behavior, as much a big screen as it is a mobile. So Nick, YouTube also doing its thing. Again, some of the numbers would be interesting to your point, because like I said, my experience, I didn't necessarily have that smooth transition over after the 10 minutes. Be curious to know if anybody did, but those are the numbers I'd be interested in seeing, Nick.
Yeah, the lifetime views one, I don't know what that is. I'm guessing
Yeah.
maybe all the content that's not also from the like historical included in those numbers.
Yeah.
Maybe that, like, it's not just the actual World Cup stuff itself. I'm not too sure what that number points to, but I'm sure maybe it is just a wider array of content that
Yeah.
they have produced, getting the visibility. Um, um, on some of the other numbers, like I think, we know YouTube's got incredible reach, and the connected TV side of things is absolutely going from strength to strength by all the metrics you'll see for them as they push towards being one of the major app platforms that people are using and choosing on their smart TVs today. They're trying to be competing with Netflix, and Netflix are reacting. Have you seen the announcements that they are looking to launch their own version of Shorts on Netflix, basically to
Yeah.
compete with YouTube, and also looking to lean into podcasting. They're looking to lean into perhaps more user generated content. Like, they are looking to really try and fight fire with fire, so to speak, with YouTube, which takes away some of that premium edge of Netflix. But this is the world we live in, where everyone's trying to one up each other, and these guys can never stop growing. Otherwise, the share price will take a dip, right? So, I know. I think YouTube's it's going to have a lot of numbers to throw around to show its impact for this major event. And I'm sure the team at YouTube will probably be breathing a sigh of relief now that they're all through that, to be able to get all those numbers and you put them to good use, because there's a lot of great stories that they'll be able to tell. I can't walk away though thinking I have a better answer of, like, oh, YouTube's now heightened or in a
Yeah.
different place to where they were for me years ago. I think they're just holding stable as YouTube's role in the market, if you know what I mean. So I think YouTube's going to stay solid in the consumer's eyes for the very much the longer term. They don't need to commit to huge live rights to do that. They have got a very unique position right now.
Yeah, your point. You referenced the Peacock deal that's going on, and like it's not the same, but it's also not terribly dissimilar. I think to what they're doing with the BBC over here in the UK, and I think that goes to your point. They don't necessarily have to be bidders for rights. It's a matter of can they have strategic relationships where they might be able to tap into some of those different things. So I agree, Nick. Very I guess positive, optimistic on the future of YouTube. Like I said, I'm just still sat here waiting for YouTube TV to make its way over to the UK, but I just don't think that's ever going to happen with how dominant Sky is over here.
Well, yeah, but they obviously tried to launch primetime channels a few years back, and that just
Yeah,
hasn't picked up steam for whatever reason. I think we need to get to the sort of come to grips with why that is the case. But it feels like YouTube TV has really been the priority for so long in the US and has really sort of put its flag in the ground in the US as one of the premium platforms and leading platforms everyone must subscribe to. So it feels inevitable they're going to make a move over here at some stage, but
yeah.
we'll have to wait and see.
The last question I will ask you on the socials, Nick, and you can say it means nothing or means something, but the fact that there were more games this year with the World Cup, obviously that's going to inflate some of the numbers. Do you think that really matters? Do you think most people in the industry will kind of recognize, yes, digital broke some numbers, but it's kind of equivalent to, I'll use a bad analogy. When Joe Burrow goes and breaks a bunch of NFL records this year, there'll be an asterisk that he played a 17th game compared to all the previous generations of form that only played a 16 game season. How much of that does that really matter with the inflation of stuff? Or do we think people will recognize that that's the case and it's still successful regardless of the inflated number of matches?
I mean, yeah, that's why their numbers will have to be taken with a grain of salt, frankly, because all the numbers will blow out. That's why the peak numbers are the most interesting to see if they've been
Yeah.
able to regain that impact that those tempo moments do have.
Yeah.
Because the risk is when you have more and more events, you oversaturate, and then you might have more of a flat line rather than the requisite peaks that they'd be looking for. So the devil's always going to be in the detail, particularly when you make a move like this. That not all these numbers will be celebrated, and that's probably why they've been half jokingly talking about increasing the scale of the next World Cup, so they can keep
Yeah.
talking about all these amazing viewership numbers that they'll be able to produce. But that's why it's going to be really difficult to look at the numbers when they're released officially and really dissect what performance was actually like. You could probably do some per game basis stuff to try and work out
Yeah.
roughly relative to the full scale thing, how impactful it's been to have the extra games. I think personally, I really enjoyed watching, and I watched a lot more than
Yeah.
I expected. But it dragged on. It's a long time, a long commitment. I did have a bit of a blip in the middle where I got a bit tired, and just when I did, that's when the
Yeah.
knockout stages started, and it kept me in there. So I feel like I've got pretty good. It worked. I think the
Yeah.
48 teams, but 60 odd just again sounds obvious, but feels like a step too
Yeah.
far.
Yeah. Well, like you said, Nick, we will wait for those official numbers. I think last time around, you and I maybe raised an eyebrow at the 5 billion unique viewers. I think they said they mentioned. I think I've heard as many as 6 billion so far this year, which would just feel incredible. But there will be more numbers that come out of this, Nick, and I think as well we'll follow the FIFA story and where that goes next. I don't think that story is going to die down, although it might not necessarily just be a pure media rights story, but interesting things as always from the world of FIFA.
Absolutely, but I'm also interested to move on to other things now as well. I think now,
Yeah,
look, I'll probably wait to see what the numbers are, but I'm also happy to start looking back at other big competitions like the Premier League kicking into gear now, and all some of these other football competitions. But also, yeah, opening up our lens to the wider world. I mean, FIFA, the World Cup has taken over
yeah,
this summer. There's no question about that,
yeah,
and I think it almost was a reminder for me. I think the previous World Cup, I didn't really have that same connectivity with it for whatever reason.
yeah.
But this year I have, and I can really felt the impact an event like that does have. So yeah, I'm interested to see what happens next in FIFA's journey, but also start looking a bit further afield what else is going on in the industry now.
Absolutely. Well, everyone, thank you for joining us for this episode of Stream Time Sports, and we'll catch you on the next episode. But before you go, there is one thing that I do need to shout out. Our team here at Sports Pro have been working very hard in collaboration with Greenfly to unveil the short form showcase, Nick, where they've gone through and rated, ranked, and put together the best short form content creators out there. Obviously, Nick, we've spent a lot of time even today talking about social media, so very relevant with some of the numbers there, Nick. But just kind of talking about the platform that we've created in collaboration with Greenfly and just why people should go check that out, Nick.
Yeah, it's a really cool piece of work. It's something that we often talk about the live rights side of things, but actually the short form side of the industry is really where most of the major sports properties in the industry are prioritizing their time to create content that engages fans in between those major moments. So we were really excited to work with Greenfly and creating a what we've called as a short form showcase, basically to give people a bit of an insight as to the types of content that is really having impact, but also some of the leading people in the industry right across the world that are creating this content and having major impact in such a in a marketplace and an ecosystem that is so difficult to grab attention. These people are really the ones sort of leading the way on that. So it's been a really nice project for the team to work across, and we've published a special. I'm going to call it like a report or a toolkit that basically you can get access to, which will give you access to all this information, insights on basically how they're producing this content, bit of a best practice, I suppose, on what's working in this space, and a whole bunch of other information and insights that I think is worth having a look at, whether you work in the content business or just interested in to see how some of these major sports properties are tackling this, I guess short form boom, which we're clearly seeing.
Absolutely. So everyone do go check that out. You'll see it on the Sports Pro homepage. If you don't see it there, just do a quick Google search, Sports Pro and Gleamfly, and I'm sure it will pop up. But thank you once again for joining us for this episode.